Welcome back, Geico Outkick Studios. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us as we roll through the program. Joined now by Barrett, Sallee. He's a writer, analyst at CBSSports.com and CBS Sports HQ. He's been on the show a lot over the years. Barrett, let's start here. Notre Dame finally wins a massive game. I thought it was probably the most entertaining college or NFL game that was going on throughout the entire weekend. What does it mean going forward for Notre Dame and for Clemson and the college football playoff in general?
Well, for the playoff in general, it's the ACC's dream scenario, right?
Yep.
Because you have Notre Dame winning the first game. If they go undefeated into Charlotte in the ACC championship game and get a one-loss Clemson and lose, then both of them go. Because Notre Dame has right now the best win in college football this year. So it's the ACC's dream scenario. And really, I think it's plausible. And Clay, I mean, you know this, like Notre Dame's the most polarizing team in college football. You either love them or you hate them, and there's really no in between. 2 years ago, when they were in the Cotton Bowl in the semifinal, they were outmanned. I mean, it was like varsity versus JV.
Yep.
You watched them play Clemson on Saturday. From an athleticism standpoint, they look the same.
Yeah.
And
they dominated on the offensive and defensive lines of scrimmage. I mean, Notre Dame could run the ball. Clemson could not. While everybody's going to focus on Trevor Lawrence not playing, Clemson moved the ball through the air. Yeah.
Yeah, DJ Uyunglele was fine. So that's what I think sort of, might have gotten lost is that they didn't look like the paper tiger. They didn't look like the fraud that I think a lot of us knew that they were 2 years ago. So I think that is really important because if they can do that against Clemson and match the athleticism that Dabo Swinney has built, then sort of by extension, they're on the same level as Alabama and Ohio State. So that was the biggest thing on that side. And the other thing for Clemson is it's not DJ Uyunglele. He's fine. They lost the running game. I don't know why they forgot that Travis Etienne exists, but apparently they did. And the secondary for Clemson is not good. And that's been the case really throughout the course of the season. So, it was eye-opening. There's no doubt about it. And I think you probably are in the same place that I was where you thought it was the big three and then a massive drop-off to Notre Dame, Florida, whoever. And now I think it's fair to say that it's a big four because Notre Dame hasn't looked like that since the 80s. Like, no joke, they looked like they belonged.
All right, the other game you just mentioned, Florida-Georgia. Florida absolutely dominated Georgia outside of the first couple of minutes of that game when Georgia got up 14-0. Did that result surprise you, and does Florida have the horses to be able to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game?
It didn't surprise me. I thought that Florida would win by double digits, and that was one of my three best bets on Sportsline, and they did.
Yeah,
and
I agreed with you, by the way. That was my blood bank guarantee. I mean, I've watched all those games be played, and I just don't understand how. Yeah, I don't understand how Georgia was favored.
I don't either, and I took the money line, and it was fine. I think that there was this sort of idea that we have traveled back in time to the year 2011 and that defense wins championships. And A, that's not real anymore. That's not how college football is. And really, that's not the way the NFL is either. And then B, Georgia's defense was all beat up anyway. When you don't have two All-Americans, that's problematic. Last time I checked. So Georgia had those two things working for it. And then the quarterback situation is just an absolute mess. So I figured Florida would put 30 on them, and it would be on Stetson Bennett and that offense to go throw for throw, and they can't do that. Like there's no way. They were fool's gold. They were fraudulent. And I live in Atlanta. I think there was this false sense of hope that this was going to, the streak would continue and Georgia would find a way because they own Florida. And in reality, I don't know how anybody can look at that game and realistically talk themselves into Georgia having any chance whatsoever.
I'm with you. Now, what about Florida against Alabama? Let's presume that Florida is going to be the SEC East representative. What kind of chance do you give Florida to beat Alabama in Atlanta in the SEC championship game?
Better than anybody else in the SEC by far. And I would say, aside from, Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame to a point, they're right there in that discussion because
Kyle Trask is just that good, right?
You look at his numbers, Clay, after 5 games. Guess who had 22 touchdowns last year through 5 games?
Joe Burrow is my bet. Yeah.
Guess how many yards he had? It was like somewhere around 1,800. Guess who has somewhere around 1,800 right now? Kyle Trask. So, if you're looking if you're going to beat Alabama, right? Like if you're going to beat Alabama, you're going to have to match them score for score, right? Like that's what Alabama does now, and Florida can do that. And if they can just defensively stop them on third down every once in a while, stop them in the red zone, hold them to field goals, they can beat them. And Florida defensively, they've done that the last 2 weeks. So I wouldn't say I'd pick Florida, but could I see them winning? Yeah, absolutely. I would say 25% chance if I had to guess right now.
All right, let's kind of look at the big picture of college football right now. There are COVID issues breaking out everywhere. This is not a huge surprise given the fact that we have made the rules that we have as it pertains to positive tests and contact tracing and everything else associated with those. Should college football, if you had a magic wand, just move back the dates of the conference title games and push back the playoff dates as well to allow as many games as possible to get played?
I would. The problem is the Rose Bowl cares too much about their silly little parade.
The friggin' Rose Bowl. It's unbelievable. Yes.
It's so dumb. Like, it is so dumb. So you're going to have to convince the Rose Bowl to do something that they don't want to do. And then the Sugar Bowl will just go along. They have their TV time, but whatever. They'll go along. So I would, if you can convince the Rose Bowl and Sugar Bowl to move back 100%, and I think the way you sell it is, okay, move the conference championship games back to January 1st or whatever, and then work in the bowl games and the playoff to where the national championship game is between the conference championship games in the NFL and the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Make it that Saturday or make it that Sunday. Doesn't matter. I would do that. I think, like we talked about, the Rose Bowl cares too much about its silly little parade on New Year's Day, and convincing them that that's a good idea is way easier said than done. But I would do it. But here's the thing is, the SEC and the other conferences outside the Big Ten and the Pac-12, they did all they could to build in safeguards. And really, the SEC has done a really good job of it because they haven't had to cancel any games yet. They postponed them, but they haven't had to cancel. Same with the ACC. So, I think that it's going. I wouldn't say it's going well, but it's kind of going down the path that I think a lot of people, you and I included, thought that it would go. And I think it's very interesting that the teams that have COVID issues, aside from Texas A&M, but the teams in the SEC that have COVID issues have had massively disappointing seasons. Talking about Mississippi State and LSU. I've talked to many coaches. They thought that if their teams tank, it's going to be really hard to get college kids to still stay the course. And guess what was 10 days ago? It was Halloween.
Yep.
Guess what's a big party day in college?
On a Saturday, no less. Halloween, by the way.
Halloween. So, if you have the confluence of circumstances where, you have a big party day and you've got a team or teams that are kind of out of it, guess what happens? You go out. And what was the report from Ross Dellinger of SI.com? That the LSU players had their issue pop up because of a Halloween party. And guess what happened on Memorial Day? And guess what happened on July 4th? Same thing.
And honestly, if you extend the season, and this is why I think this is such an intriguing question. We're talking to Barrett Sallee. He's a writer, analyst at CBSSports.com, CBS Sports HQ. Then you put even more into play Thanksgiving, which I'm sure you have heard from a lot of coaches they're nervous about because family interactions and everything else. And then also, if you push back the conference title games, you run through Christmas, which becomes an even bigger issue because people are going to say, wait a minute, right now the game is played on December 19th, I believe, if I'm correct, all the conference title games. They announce who's going to be in the playoff on the 20th. Well, the next weekend is Christmas weekend, so you're going to be getting crushed by so many people out there like, oh, look at all these, college athletes who aren't even able to go home for Christmas. They're having to stay and play in these games, and they're not able to have normal lifestyles and everything else. But the coaches would all say Thanksgiving and Christmas is when their players are going to go home, be around a lot more people and their family, and theoretically all come back and test positive, much like may have happened around Halloween.
Right, and that goes back to something that really was apparent back in May and June. They're safer on campus.
Amen.
They're
we talked about that. I think you came on when we were having the battle of whether college football would be played or not, and we made that argument. They're safer surrounded by constant testing on a college campus with all the medical personnel and all of the support staff trying to keep them from being exposed to the virus.
Well, that's common sense, and that ain't so common these days, Clay.
Yeah.
You know how that goes. But yeah, I mean, if you're getting tested 3-4 times a week and you're in a pseudo bubble as much as you can make it, at least in college football terms, then yeah. And I think, in years past, you've had coaches allow kids to go home for 48 hours during Thanksgiving. Even if they have a game on Saturday, they find a way to make it work. And if they, don't go home, they'll have a Thanksgiving dinner, whatever. Christmas is a different animal. And, if you have kids, if you have college athletes there for a reason to play football, then but you're actually going to protect a lot of people, not just those players, but their families and everybody who their families come in contact with. So, yeah, there are a lot of moving parts to this. And getting back to what you asked earlier, because of all those things, yeah, you need to push back the playoff. And really, you should push back the bowl season, too. But the playoff, obviously, is the moneymaker. Personally, I would love all bowl games to start, the second week of January and just roll them through. Put them on at midweek. If there are no fans there, they already are TV programs, right? Like, that's the reason they exist.
Yeah.
So if there are going to be no fans there, just put them on a Wednesday. That's what the MAC's doing with their schedule, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Let's go.
When you look at the Big Ten right now, you've got Nebraska 0-2, you've got Penn State 0-3, you've got Michigan 1-2. Which of those three programs would you buy stock in right now if you had to buy stock in one of them?
Oh, man. Talk about buying the dip.
Yeah, no kidding. Which I hope, by the way, a lot of you did out there back in March with the COVID collapse. We hit a new stock market high yesterday, but it's no harm, no foul there, but an easy interlude. So Michigan 1-2, 0-3 Penn State, or 0-2 Nebraska, which frankly probably would be 0-3 if their game against Wisconsin had been able to be played.
Yeah, we should have got crypto at the dip too, but that's just
well, no kidding. That's done well as well. Yeah,
that worked out pretty well. No, I guess Penn State, just because I trust James Franklin. I think that team, when Micah Parsons opting out, their star linebacker, I think that was kind of expected. But when they lost Journey Brown, their top running back, a week before the season, and then they lost Noah Cain, their second best running back, 3 carries into the season. I think it demoralized them to the point that they're just sort of disinterested at this point. And I think for James Franklin, there's no playbook for this, right? Like there's no blueprint for how to deal with a team getting disinterested in the middle of a pandemic. So I think he's having a hard time trying to figure out how to do that. But, the ceiling for Penn State's high. I don't think anybody disagrees there. It's not for Nebraska anymore because this is not 1995. And for Michigan, I would like Michigan to be good, but they're so married to Jim Harbaugh and they're so locked in for a variety of different reasons that it's almost impossible for him not to be there. And he's the problem. At Penn State, it's them being disinterested. That's the problem. At Nebraska, it's the recruiting base. That's the problem. At Michigan, it's Jim Harbaugh. and it's a lot more difficult to get rid of him or separate from him than the other two schools had in fixing their problems.
So one of our writers at Outkick, Greg Couch, floated the idea that Jim Harbaugh to the Chicago Bears could make sense. Harbaugh, obviously, a lot of connections in the Midwest. How does the Harbaugh-Michigan relationship end? Do you think he's coaching for Michigan next year?
Oh, man. I would say 50-50 on that. It depends on what jobs are open in the NFL. I would lean toward no, just because I think there's so many moving parts with COVID that the massive disruption of everything this offseason would be really hard for a program to come back from, even a program as potentially good as Michigan. To me, you can't fire him, right? He's your guy. Financially, it is what it is. And, you can't, if you're Jim Harbaugh, you don't want to hold your alma mater hostage, so to speak, right? So to me, I think the way it ends is like a couple with an amicable divorce, right? Like they just fell out of love with each other. They're still going to work their hardest to make sure their kids do well and they have great lives, but they just fell out of love with each other. I think somehow you have to make that happen. And if that means Jim Harbaugh taking a massive, massive hit to his buyout, then so be it. And if it means Michigan maybe putting their financial stability at more risk than they like, but not a ton more, then, okay, you do that. But it's got to be some sort of friendly, amicable divorce like a couple has when they fall out of love with each other.
We're talking to Barrett, Sallee, writer, analyst, CBSSports.com, CBS Sports HQ. Hugh Freeze, 7-0, wins on the road over Syracuse and on the road over Virginia Tech. Liberty football, nobody would have ever believed that they would be 7-0 ever. He's doing it in year 2. I think there is so much corona-related financial difficulties in college sports right now that, as you just kind of walked through with the Jim Harbaugh situation, it's going to be relatively difficult in order to be able to, kind of work through this, right? It's going to be hard to fire a coach. It's going to be hard with all the people that are getting laid off to hire a new coach. Does Freeze come back to Liberty by default because no really good jobs are going to come open at the end of this year?
I think that is the most likely scenario of about 50 different scenarios. I think you're going to have a program that is readily available, and the one that is just happens to be his alma mater in Southern Miss. So yeah. I think there's that. But would he want to go there? Because Liberty's poured a ton of money into that football program.
Yeah, I think that's not a move he'd be willing to make. Personally,
I agree. It'd almost be like going a lateral move just for the sake of doing it, which is stupid. I do think the double secret probation in the SEC is still a thing, but at some point that's got to be lifted because otherwise Hugh Freeze is going to sue him. But where would he go? Would it be Tennessee or South Carolina? South Carolina would make a move, maybe, financially, if it makes sense. But would he want to go there? Does he feel like he could win there knowing that Georgia and Florida are in that division? At Tennessee, would they be willing to? I mean, Tennessee, better than I do, the decade of dysfunction is a real thing. They've paid out a lot of money to coaches in a lot of different sports who were not coaching them.
Yes.
Do you want to go down that road again? Probably not. The reason I say he's probably going back to Liberty more than anything else is that he makes most sense in the Big 12. But the Big 12, they filled 5 jobs over the last 2.5 years. There just is not anything there. So, yeah, I think he stays at Liberty and continues to build his rep. And I think if I had to bet at some point in the near future, not this offseason, but really soon after, he's in the SEC again.
Barrett, Sallee, we appreciate you getting up early for us. It'll be interesting to see what happens this week. Lots of drama coming, certainly in the world of college football. We'll talk to you again soon.